If a person truly wants to lead a country, they must be willing to endure any hardship they would ask their soldiers to face. This was the guiding principle of Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso. With this conviction deeply rooted in him, he made a decision that stunned even his most trusted advisors. He would personally join a raid on one of the most dangerous terrorist camps in the country. The underground situation room in the presidential palace in Ouagadougou was tense and silent as President Traoré studied a series of satellite images. Still in his mid-30s, he had the intense, unshakable focus of a man forged in the crucible of military experience. He examined the photos without lifting his eyes and asked, "How many civilians are being held?" General Ouedraogo, a seasoned commander and one of Traoré's oldest military allies, cleared his throat before answering. "At least 40, Mr. President. Mostly women and children taken from the villages of Solhan and Tadarat. Intelligence suggests they're being used as human shields." The terrorist stronghold was buried deep in the northern wilderness near the border with Mali. It had served for years as a base for launching attacks against nearby communities, army positions, and even mining sites. 3 previous operations to destroy it had ended in costly failures. Heavy casualties with no strategic gain. Defense Minister Traore, another longtime comrade of Traoré, added grimly, "They're heavily fortified. Most of their weapons appear to come from the remnants of Gaddafi's arsenal in Libya. They've posted sentries on nearby ridges, and they've carved multiple escape routes into the surrounding terrain." Traoré listened in silence, then gestured toward a spot on the satellite image, a cluster of buildings on the northwest side of the camp. "And the hostages are kept here?" "Yes, sir," came the reply. The president straightened, making deliberate eye contact with each of the 6 high-ranking officers in the room. These were men who had fought beside him before he became head of state. "I've made my decision," he said, voice steady and composed. "Operation Desert Hawk will launch tomorrow at 0200 hours. Special Forces Team Alpha will lead the assault. The first objective is the safe recovery of the hostages. Once that's achieved, we neutralize the camp." All the commanders nodded. That was expected. What followed was not. "I will be going with Team Alpha." A stunned silence filled the room, as if oxygen had suddenly vanished. Then, chaos. Several voices rose at once in protest. "Mr. President, that's not acceptable. It's too dangerous. Security protocols forbid." He raised one hand. Instantly, the room fell quiet again. "My decision is final," he said firmly. "I will not order our soldiers to take risks I am unwilling to share. This mission is too critical for me to stay behind. I need to understand what they are truly facing on the ground." General Ouedraogo stepped forward, speaking with deep concern and respect. "Sir, with all due respect, you are no longer just a soldier. You are the leader of a nation. If you are killed or captured, the consequences would be devastating." Traoré's stern demeanor softened slightly. "I understand your worry, General, but think of the message this sends. Not only to our enemies, but to our own people. A president who shares the burden of danger inspires more than one who leads from a distant command post." He pointed again to the map. "I will not interfere with command decisions. Captain Zeta remains in charge of the operation. I'll be there as a participant and observer, not a superior officer." Minister Traoré, who had known Traoré long before he became president, recognized the finality in his voice. The matter was settled. There would be no changing his mind. "We must set up strict safety protocols, sir," Traoré said. "Communication plans, emergency extraction routes, contingencies for worst-case scenarios." Traoré agreed. And this must remain absolutely confidential. No one outside this room must know. The official story is that I'm making an overnight inspection of the eastern provinces. For the next 2 hours, the group finalized every detail of the operation. When the meeting ended, Traore asked General Ouedraogo to stay behind. Alone, the two men spoke freely as only old brothers in arms could. "Ibrahim," the general said, "this isn't necessary. You've already proven yourself." Traore walked to a nearby window, the soft light of sunset casting long shadows over the palace gardens. "This isn't about proving anything," he replied. "It's about understanding. How can I make decisions that send our youth into danger if I've forgotten what danger feels like?" He turned back to Ouedraogo, his expression tightening. "Besides, something doesn't sit right. We've failed 3 times against this camp. That shouldn't happen. Not with our capabilities. I want to see what we've been missing. You think there's more going on?" Traore nodded. "Yes, their tactics are becoming more sophisticated. They have weapons we can't trace. Someone is helping them. I need to find out who." That night, long after the palace had gone quiet, Traore sat alone writing 3 letters. One was for his sister, whom he had recently reunited with after years of separation. Another was for his closest advisor, containing instructions to be carried out if he did not return. The last was for the people of Burkina Faso, a sealed envelope marked "to be opened in the event of my death." Shortly after midnight, he changed into plain combat fatigues with no insignia or indication of rank. A soft knock on the door told him it was time. "The transport is ready, Mr. President," his security chief whispered. "Team Alpha is preparing at the staging point." "Thank you, Cabaret," he said. "Remember, total secrecy. As far as anyone knows, I'm asleep in my quarters. No one is to disturb me until morning." The trip north was made in an unmarked vehicle with dark windows. No motorcade, no flags, no presidential insignia. At the forward operating base, he was taken to a dimly lit hangar where 24 elite members of Special Forces Team Alpha were checking gear one final time. Captain Zeta, the mission commander, approached with a salute. "Mr. President, I respect your decision, but I must formally object to your participation." Traore returned the salute. "Objection noted, Captain. Now brief me on the insertion plan." For the next hour, the President moved among the soldiers, reviewing equipment, rehearsing procedures, and updating mission data. Though it had been years since his last combat assignment, his instincts returned quickly. His hands moved with practiced ease as he double-checked his gear and reviewed approach vectors. At 1300 hours, the team boarded 2 Black Hawk helicopters. As the rotors roared to life and the aircraft lifted into the night sky, Traore felt something familiar rise in him, a focused calm that he knew from long-ago battles. Around him, the soldiers sat in silent readiness. But he could feel it. The pride, the respect, the silent acknowledgement of a leader who did not merely command from above, but stood among them in the shadows, willing to face death beside them. The helicopters cut through the dark sky in formation, their blades thudding rhythmically against the cold northern air. Inside, the cabin lights were dimmed to red, bathing the team in a ghostly glow. President Ibrahim Traoré sat between 2 operators, helmet strapped on, rifle across his chest. He was indistinguishable from the rest. No badges, no marks of power, only silent resolve. The insertion point was 5 kilometers southeast of the target camp. It had been carefully chosen. High ground with broken terrain, covered in rocks and sparse vegetation, ideal for concealment during their approach. The helicopters touched down without incident. Engines still running, the soldiers disembarked swiftly and melted into the landscape. The aircraft lifted away moments later, vanishing into the night like phantoms. Now on foot, Team Alpha moved in tight formation. Each soldier knew their role. Ibrahim took position near the rear, under the supervision of Captain Zeta, who was both leading the unit and ensuring the president's safety without treating him as a liability. Communication was limited to hand signals and brief bursts over encrypted comms. They moved steadily across jagged terrain, avoiding known patrol routes and keeping noise to an absolute minimum. Every few minutes they paused, scanned their surroundings, adjusted course. The moon was only a sliver above them, the darkness deep and silent. After 2 hours of movement, they arrived at a high overlook facing the enemy compound. Below, the camp flickered with scattered lights from torches and solar-powered flood lamps. Through high-powered optics, they could see militants walking perimeter routes, some manning mounted machine guns, others sleeping around fires. Captain Zeta pointed toward a small group of structures on the northwestern edge, low, makeshift buildings made of corrugated metal and mud brick. "That's the hostage zone," he whispered over the radio. "Thermals show at least 30 heat signatures, children and non-combatants. Definitely." Traore studied the layout. The terrorists had built their camp like a fortress, a central plaza with storage and weapons caches, guard towers overlooking each main road, trenches at the perimeter, and the terrain on 3 sides was open and exposed. Only the eastern ridge, the side Team Alpha occupied, offered any meaningful cover. The plan was to split into 2 teams. Alpha 1 would create a diversion near the south gate, blasting a fuel depot to draw fighters away from the hostages. Alpha 2, including the president, would breach from the northwest, extract the civilians, and signal for the rapid response unit to sweep in and secure the camp. At 0350 hours, the operation began. A thunderous explosion rocked the southern perimeter. Flames leapt into the sky as fuel tanks ignited, sending a plume of black smoke over the compound. The enemy scrambled, shouting orders, firing blindly into the darkness. As predicted, dozens of them ran southward to confront the non-existent attackers. That's when Alpha 2 moved. They advanced in a tight line, using a dry riverbed as cover. Night vision goggles flickered as they approached the hostage zone. One by one, they breached the building entrances. The scenes inside were grim: terrified women, malnourished children, some injured. But they were alive. Traore helped escort a small girl no older than 7. Her hands trembled as she clutched his jacket. He whispered reassurances to her in Mossi, one of the local languages. Around him, soldiers were guiding people out of the buildings, forming a protective ring around them. One operator applied a tourniquet to a wounded boy's leg. Another carried an infant swaddled in cloth. Suddenly, contact. A burst of automatic fire erupted from the north, where a few guards had doubled back. The extraction team returned fire, disciplined and precise. 2 hostiles fell before they could reach the hostages. A third threw a grenade, which landed near Traore. Without hesitation, one of the operators shoved the president down and threw himself over the explosive. It detonated, shrapnel flying, killing the operator instantly but shielding the rest. Time slowed for a moment. Traore lay stunned, the shockwave ringing in his ears. He sat up to find the young soldier, barely in his 20s, lying motionless. Captain Zeta grabbed him by the shoulder and barked, "We have to move now!" The group began retreating toward the exfil point, moving quickly but carefully. The sound of gunfire increased behind them as the rest of the camp realized what was happening. The main strike force began engaging enemy fighters in the central courtyard, drawing fire away from the extraction team. By 0410 hours, the civilians were secured at a rendezvous point, where backup teams were waiting. Medics immediately began triage. A second wave of helicopters landed under cover of darkness to extract the hostages and wounded. President Traore insisted on helping load the injured onto stretchers, refusing special treatment. As the helicopters lifted off, he stood at the edge of the landing zone, watching the battlefield still ablaze in the distance. The camp was cleared by dawn. With the hostages safe and dozens of militants either captured or killed, the mission was declared a success. What struck most of the soldiers afterward was not the efficiency of the operation, but that their commander-in-chief had been there, not watching from a drone feed, not giving orders from a secure command post, but there. When they returned to the base, Traore gathered the soldiers together in a quiet hangar. He knelt beside the body of the young operator who had died protecting him. He removed his helmet and placed it on the fallen soldier's chest. Then, speaking softly, he said, "Your courage will never be forgotten. Your sacrifice will live on in every act of freedom your people enjoy." That morning, as the sun rose over Burkina Faso, the official presidential schedule was released. It listed a visit to the eastern provinces, meetings with local leaders, and inspection of development projects. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that the president had returned from the front lines. In the days that followed, the nation celebrated the successful raid. The freed hostages spoke of soldiers who had treated them like family. One woman described being carried for kilometers by a soldier who spoke to her gently and helped her child smile again. She didn't know it was the president himself. When the truth inevitably leaked, it didn't come from the government. It came from the men and women he fought beside. Quiet whispers among soldiers, a commander who had seen something most leaders never dared. And in the silence of his office, Ibrahim Traoré reopened the letter addressed to the people of Burkina Faso. He smiled faintly, then tore it in half. He hadn't died that night, but something had changed. He had crossed a line no president ever had, not to prove he was brave, but to understand what it truly meant to lead. In the days that followed the raid, President Ibrahim Traoré kept a low profile. Publicly, he resumed his routine, attending cabinet meetings, inspecting infrastructure projects, and delivering carefully worded speeches about national unity and resilience. Nowhere in the official narrative was it mentioned that he had just returned from a battlefield, had carried a bleeding child through enemy fire, or had personally witnessed one of his men die protecting him. But those who were there, Team Alpha, the medics, the mission planners, knew. And though they honored his demand for secrecy, word began to spread through the military ranks. Quietly, almost reverently, soldiers began referring to him not as His Excellency, but simply Commandant. Respect in uniformed circles isn't granted by title. It is earned in moments of hardship, of sacrifice, of silence in the face of danger. And in that sense, Traoré's presence on the ground had created a ripple effect that no televised speech or political campaign ever could. Back in the capital, intelligence analysts began sifting through materials recovered from the camp. What they found disturbed them. The terrorists had not been acting alone. Among the documents were encrypted communications, weapons invoices in Arabic and Russian, and unfamiliar tactical manuals. One device, recovered from a senior militant's tent, contained GPS logs and satellite data far beyond the group's known capabilities. When decrypted, the evidence pointed to a foreign network, organized, well-funded, and determined to destabilize the Sahel region. The weapons had not come from scattered black markets as previously thought. They had been part of coordinated shipments moving through Libya, Niger, and parts of Sudan. Traoré had been right. The insurgents were not merely rogue elements, they were proxies, part of a wider game. He convened a classified meeting with his intelligence chief and top military advisors. "We're not just fighting ideology," he said grimly. "We're fighting interest, strategic, economic, geopolitical, and our people are caught in the middle." From that moment, the national security strategy shifted. Traore quietly began restructuring the military's intelligence units. He established direct communication channels with trusted counterparts in neighboring Mali and Chad. He reached out to partners in neutral countries, not major powers, but small states with effective special operations and anti-terrorism records. He didn't want colonial lectures or token aid. He wanted cooperation based on mutual respect. And yet, even as he took these steps, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. One evening, weeks after the raid, Traore visited the family of the fallen soldier who had saved his life. The young man's name was Adama Sankara, age 23, recently engaged, the eldest of 5 siblings. His parents lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. There was no press, no entourage, just Traore, his driver, and a folded flag. He sat with the family in silence at first. The mother wept softly. The father, stoic, looked down at his hands. Then Traore spoke, not as president, but as a fellow soldier. "Your son saved my life, and not just mine. He helped save dozens of innocent people that night. His bravery was not in dying. It was in choosing to protect others, knowing the cost." He knelt and placed the flag in the father's hands. "I can't bring him back, but I can promise you this. His name will be remembered not in speeches, but in what we build. Schools, clean water, a nation where young men don't have to die to feel worth." The visit wasn't broadcast, but word spread, as it always does in close-knit communities. And that word reshaped how many people saw their leader, not as a politician seeking applause, but as a man burdened with responsibility who walked through fire and came back humbled. In the months that followed, insurgent attacks in the north slowed. The terrorists, disrupted and scattered, had lost a key foothold. More importantly, morale within Burkina Faso's army soared. Recruitment increased, desertions dropped. Soldiers wrote letters home about a president who fought beside them, not behind them. And yet, Traore knew his time in office wouldn't be defined by a single operation. That was only the beginning. The real fight, the war for lasting peace, economic justice, and national dignity, would be waged in classrooms, in hospitals, in remote villages forgotten by generations of officials before him. One morning, standing before a new memorial wall being built outside the capital, etched with the names of every soldier lost in the fight against terror, he asked his aide, "Do you think they'll ever understand why I went?" His aide paused before replying, "Maybe not all of them, sir. But those who needed to understand, they do." Traore looked at the wall, then down at the ground, and nodded. Then it was worth it. He turned, walked toward his convoy, and resumed the work of rebuilding a nation, brick by brick, day by day, not with speeches, but with action. And though few would ever know the full story of that silent night in the north, its consequences would echo for years to come. For Ibrahim Traoré had not just led a mission, he had crossed a threshold into a rare kind of leadership. One, not of power, but of presence. Not of orders given, but of burdens shared. And in doing so, he had changed not just the outcome of a battle, but the soul of a nation.